Hello everyone, welcome to the Sweeney Show, Business and Law Podcast. My name is David Sweeney. Joining me here today is Wendy Doyle, solicitor and business owner. Wendy, you're very welcome.
Hi David, lovely to be here, thanks.
Oh, thank you so much for your time. So what part of the country are you in? Is it Wicklow?
So originally a Wicklow woman, David. I have an office in Dublin, but
Okay.
The plan going forward is to try and build an office in Wicklow. So I'm dividing my time at the moment between both, but a Wicklow woman, yeah.
Okay, and whoa, don't we all know time is the most precious commodity we have out there? And so you, is it general practice you have, or what type of legal practice do you have?
So I suppose primarily the key aspect of my business would be employment law, David, but I would have started off, a lot of my training was employment law, and then it kind of morphed into a lot of corporate commercial stuff. But mainly employment law,
Okay.
and I suppose ancillary areas around that would be everything from intellectual property law, pensions law,
Okay.
and general litigation, really.
Yeah, and I was looking at your bio there on your website. So it seems you had a training in large firms. Did you? A more corporate type training? You have a tax background.
That's it.
And so,
yeah, I'm actually mentoring a couple of people at the moment in UCD and the Law Society, and they're saying to me, "How did you get to where you are?"
Yeah.
I think, and you probably will agree with me on this. Some of it, David, is I suppose you fall into it nearly. So for my sins, I was in tax for a couple of years in PwC, and they at the time, back in, I won't give my age away, a number of years ago, had an independent law firm, and that's where I went to do my training. So it was literally 4 floors down, so from there to William Fry. So it just happened to be large firms. Yeah, that's where it started off, and ended up on my own then.
And how did you get into laws in your family? Do you have I know we spoke briefly. I think we actually might have crossed paths in UCD back in the day, or our times might have crossed over. Is there a legal background in your family, or were you the first to take it on? Or what was your interest?
Just me. A few people have again asked me recently, how did you get into law and connection-wise, but none whatsoever. And in fact, I was going to be a vet until I was about 17.
Okay.
So don't ask me how I ended up in law, but I suppose I'd always, because of the business and law degree, David, you'd probably agree with me on this, it opened a lot of doors, and I always found myself to be quite analytical, loved research, loved all that kind of stuff, and it was kind of a natural progression in a way, but the degree opened so many doors at the time that you could go one way or another, if I could say that. So
Yeah.
Down the business route or the legal route, and it happened to be the legal route for me, but we probably crossed paths in pubs more than on campus. But
The social bar at UCD, yeah.
Yeah. But no background in law whatsoever.
Okay.
So first in the family to do it,
Yeah.
and just lucky the way it's gone, I suppose, in a lot of ways.
And did you come out of UCD then and go straight on the legal route and do your Blackhall straight away, or what was your path to get from college to kind of Blackhall?
David, when I should have been in in O'Reilly Hall getting my parchment, I was sitting on the top of Ayers Rock in Australia.
Oh, nice.
So an opportunity came up. I was back in 96. I'd like to think that we were one of the first to kind of go out to Australia at the time, but an opportunity came up. A few friends were talking about going to Australia for a while, so we went, I think, in July 96. And whilst out there, I'd always wanted to, I suppose, go back and do a master's. And I had applied for a master's in European law in UCD, so I came back and did that. So from 96 to 97 Australia, then back to do the masters, and after that it was actually my brother who ended up submitting my CV to PwC for me, unbeknownst to myself, believe it or not. He was probably trying to get me a job at the time, so I ended up going in there to do tax for a couple of years, but not through the traditional route, because I was in tax until around, I think, 2000, and then went to Blackhall. So probably good 4 or 5 years after college before I'd gone down there.
Yeah, and your legal training, that was in a large firm, was it?
Yeah, so I suppose at the time, back in what year would it have been? 1998, PricewaterhouseCoopers had an independent law firm at the time, which was started by a couple of people from William Fry and a couple of the big corporate firms. So that independent law firm of PwC was where I did my training. And very fortunate, because there was probably only five or six in total at the time.
Yeah.
And that grew exponentially then for a couple of years. And when I finished Blackhall, I spent a couple of years in that law firm in Evans and Company, as it was known, and then I went to William Fry after that. And after William Fry, an opportunity came up, because I suppose, I don't know, probably no more than yourself, I always wanted to steer my own ship, and an opportunity came up to kind of start and develop a legal division in Deloitte. You know, mainly employment law, so that kind of gave me the real taste then of being out on your own. So background was big firms, but I think, you know, it fell that way more than anything.
Yeah.
But I'd always had that drive, probably no more than yourself, to try and do something different and go out by yourself. Yeah,
and then I think you set up in around the 2009 time, which was like, there was like car bombs going off everywhere. Yeah, the economy was just crashing, property, everything.
But you see, I suppose I'd be a bit of a risk taker anyway, a balanced risk taker, if there's such a thing. And what I saw in 2009 and 2010 as a solicitor or any business owner was, I suppose, a lot of challenges, David, but also, you know, costs were lower then in terms of office space and general. Like, I had an office space on Bagot Street that was, let's just say, considerably less than what you would be paying for it now. So I started at it as a challenging time, but the costs were easier to manage at that stage.
You just said that you're a bit of a risk taker, or a calculated risks, but you obviously took a bet on yourself. What do you think is your own drive or motivation to kind of set up a business in those circumstances and make it succeed? Because we're now, you know, obviously you were 12 years or 13 years now in business. What was the drive you needed to start, and during that period, what are the lessons you've learned along the way, business-wise?
That's a really good question. I would say about myself, and it's I suppose I wouldn't like anyone to think it comes across as arrogant at all, because I'm probably the furthest thing from it, but I always had that innate self-belief that you can do anything you want to do if you put your mind to it. And the way I would have been, I suppose, brought up was, you know, my mum and dad, and my mum in particular, would have always instilled in me that you can do anything you want, provided, you know, if you're healthy enough to be able to do it. So I knew that, and you'll probably agree with me, I mean, you have to take a risk. You know, I'm not saying you jump completely off the deep end, but you have to take a risk if you want to go out on your own. And I knew I could do it, David, to be honest. I knew that I would face a huge amount of challenges, but it would be something, provided, as I said, I was healthy enough to keep going, that I always believed that I'd be able to overcome anything, really. The challenges have been numerous, as I'm sure you found. The first couple of years were tough, because I suppose when you're self-employed in any business, and particularly maybe from the legal profession, that you're always wondering where the next piece of work is going to come from, especially when you start off. And you learn an awful lot about, you know, managing clients and trying to deliver that service that clients, you know, you try to differentiate yourself and do things differently and to give 100% quality service when you can. But it's been challenging. I'm not going to say it's been easy, but I felt that if I got through the first recession for the couple of years, that it would get a little bit easier. And also, I suppose in some ways, David, fortunate that I wasn't doing property and conveyancing and the kind of areas, if I could say, that kind of fell off the cliff at the time. And how? So I was lucky in terms of and, you know, hard work and head down, really.
And this is a kind of how will I phrase this question? Do you consider yourself a solicitor who's running a business, or are you a business owner who happens to be a solicitor?
That's a really, really good question. You didn't tell me you were going to stop me with some of these ones. I'll tell you, just if I could set the context of it, and again, because we're very similar in terms of our background, I found the business and law degree invaluable. Because the legal profession, I suppose, when you train, you do the academics and all that, and you learn, I suppose, on the job. But before you even get into that, what I found really beneficial was, the business end of our degree had everything from, finance, accounting, marketing, and that in itself was a platform before you even got into the legal profession. So from my perspective, I suppose law is a business in itself, and a lot of solicitors probably, you and I might have been fortunate to an extent with the background, but a lot of solicitors just go in and one has to practice law, but equally we all have to run a business around it as well. So it's a very good question. It's like any business, I suppose, it's the business of law at the end of the day.
Yeah, but also I think you'd agree that going to college and having a business degree and reading a business book really has a small transference to the reality of it.
Oh, listen, absolutely. You and I have talked about, and as I said, I really admire the marketing efforts and how you've grown your business. One can learn a lot academically, but practicing it is a whole other thing. And, with a couple of students that I'm mentoring in UCD at the moment, their question is, well, how did you get to where you got to? And, is it all that you have to get into big firms? And my genuine answer is, my background and my training was, I was very fortunate to have the opportunities that I had, but equally, some of the solicitors and colleagues that I still know today came from 1 or 2 man practices, and incredible experience, incredible exposure, probably, and not in a negative sense, but probably to some degree more than bigger firms can afford you at certain times, depending on your department. So, I suppose in a way, when you're smaller or you're in smaller firms, you probably get a little bit more exposure by being thrown into the deep end. So you learn as you go, David. I still learn today. Learn something new every day, and that's genuine with business as well.
I want to hopefully talk about some of the actual specifics of the employment law and what's happening now with COVID and that, and consequences for both employees and employers. But just on that conversation on drive and getting you to where you are now, it sounds like the word resilience is jumping out here. Do you think Wendy 2009 and Wendy now, where are we now, 2021, that you've become way more resilient and able to deal with issues as they come up?
Again, I mean, the COVID is a very different, it's entirely different than what happened in 2009 and 2010, insofar as, I suppose, back then people could kind of see the crash coming. COVID, I remember standing at the school gates last year, and a parent said to me, the school's closing, and like all of us, and one doesn't have to be a parent to realise this, but at that time I thought, that's fine, it'll be a week or two. And so what I'm getting at is COVID came totally out of the blue. But yes, I would think that, I suppose, the resilience that you do build up when you make a lot of mistakes at the beginning of business, that in itself was probably the foundation to give you that additional resilience that we all needed for COVID, I think, David. But nobody, in my opinion, could have ever foreseen what challenges we were all going to face. In terms of where we are now, everything, I mean, it's just, I still feel like I'm in a Hollywood movie at times. It's just incredible out there, I think. It's
surreal, isn't it? And what we've actually become used to very quickly. How is that, let's just talk specifically since March last year. How has the employment law landscape changed? How has COVID affected it? Because obviously people were laid off work temporarily, the government schemes, and, businesses, lots of people haven't returned to business in the hospitality industry. But what's that actually done on the day-to-day of the employment law sector? What's happening out there?
Again, a very good question. I suppose the employment law landscape has changed dramatically. Prior to COVID, a lot of employees would have looked to work from home on a flexible basis. An employer had no legal obligation to honour that, and it's still the case. Well, they're bringing in changes at the moment, but the reality of it is, a lot of employees are working from home. There's huge health and safety considerations around COVID and, people not being able to attend the workplace. you're correct in terms of layoff. Huge amount of the workforce laid off, probably a lot more layoffs and redundancies to come, unfortunately. Things like for any business, but specifically from an employment point of view, the pandemic unemployment payment that payment can't last forever. And the concern for a lot of employers and employees at the moment is when that lifts, David, unfortunately the true reality of the damage that's been done is going to come to light. Equally, I'm doing insolvency, kind of an additional qualification in insolvency at the moment, and that flows naturally into a couple of the lectures that I've attended from the big accountancy firms are getting very few inquiries at the moment, but they expect, unfortunately, a large increase towards the end of 2020, 2021. But in essence, the employment landscape has shifted dramatically. I mean, you could talk for hours about the changes that have come in, what queries we're getting, everything from, if people are working from home, it's still a place of work. There's still health and safety considerations. It's massive, absolutely massive. And I'm getting queries that I would never have anticipated, even, from larger firms and companies that have had employees that may have gone home pre-COVID for a holiday and couldn't get back. Okay. And then they may be working abroad. And then there's tax considerations around that from a residence and, how many days they spend outside of Ireland. So it's affected everybody from the large multinationals right down to the very small businesses.
And how is the, say the Workplace Relations Commissioner, one of the entities that actually hear employment law cases, how has that been affected? Are there cases happening now?
Yeah, again, so last week I would have had two remote cases before the WRC. Challenging as well, I'll say, because when COVID came in last year, obviously there were no hearings at all being heard, so there was a backlog of cases. And what was tending to happen is the cases that were being heard were what I would say were uncontested cases. So, for example, somebody arguing that they didn't get their employment contract, and they either did or they didn't. So that's, an uncontested case, I suppose, to an extent. But what we're seeing now, and the two cases that I would have had last week were two contested cases from an unfair dismissal perspective. So the cases are progressing. There's still a backlog. The challenge with remote hearings, even before the civil courts, are, when you're cross-examining witnesses or you've 7 parties on a remote hearing, and it depends how they're managed. Everybody's on mute, but then if you want to talk, you have to nearly put your hand up. It's massive challenges, and there's a lot of task forces being set up at the moment to try and continue all of this going forward when COVID, if dare I say, eventually is I suppose managed. That a lot of cases are going to be continued to be heard remotely, but they are hearing cases, David, as are the Labour Court and obviously the civil courts in terms of urgent applications at the moment. And
how have you adapted your own firm or the way you've done business in the last year?
So I would have always been a big fan of, even when you've got clients for consultations, remote consultations. So I would have been doing those before COVID arose. Because, definitely people felt, well, if I'm an hour away, can we not, it just made sense for everybody to do that. And again, usually being based in Cork, you can have clients in Donegal, you can have a client in New York now. So I think if you didn't adapt before COVID, you had to adapt very quickly or you were going to be left behind. That's the simple reality of it. So I think what I have seen, you definitely sense and see a lot of firms really trying to, it's the word everybody's using, but pivot and adapt. And even with clients and other law firms, I mean, I'm blown away by the efforts and how people have managed to, I suppose, turn things around pretty much overnight. Yeah. I don't know if you see that yourself, but you see, I suppose, in a way, business owners and the legal profession, it was something a lot of people were forced to do, but a lot of people have been talking about for years before this. So you would have seen it yourself, no doubt, with clients and, how you've managed it. But I suppose I would have been very aware of and had been doing using a lot of technology in the firm anyway beforehand, so it wasn't a massive shock to me, to be honest. And also I suppose I would have been in the office during the first lockdown, because it's big enough for me to be in here by myself and others working from home. And then again, you know, with the same, but technology has kept me going. It's the only way that we can do business.
So what are the plans for you going forward in the short term and the long term? Is it, you know, your move to Wicklow, is that going to be a permanent just one office location, or what's your, and you're also continuing your education, and so what are the plans for you?
So I don't know if it's an appropriate term to say I'm a complete and utter nerd. I actually really enjoy learning, so you know, I'll continue to do that. The plan, I suppose, is with two little people in my life, that the plan was to move back to Wicklow, which is where I'm from, and I have an office in Dublin, but you know, really to focus on growing an office in Wicklow. And a lot of my business would be very, I suppose, SME focused, and I suppose I try and a lot of the areas that I'm focused on, David, I try and do things a little bit differently, not differently, but in terms of, you know, intellectual property law, trademark agent, you know, insolvencies and restructurings, employment, and you know, a few different areas. So that would be the focus going forward, is to really focus on the SME sector and startups, and try and build it from there. But you know, build the Wicklow office will be the primary consideration now. So and that and world domination, obviously. So
the plan continues.
That's the plan, along
Pinky
with
and the brain.
Millions, hopefully this evening at some point. It's something I think, you know, that phrase that people say to you the whole time, if you enjoy what you do, you don't really feel like you're working. And I genuinely just love what I do. And
that's that kind of.
I love a challenge. I love a challenge.
That leads
no more than yourself, I'm sure.
And that kind of leads me into my last question, though, as we have a lot of trainee solicitors and young people starting out in their legal career and thinking about a course for college and all that kind of thing. What would you say to anyone thinking about starting out in a career in law? What advice would you give them?
So, as part of it, as I mentioned, I'm getting these questions from students because I'm mentoring 2 students in UCD at the moment, and I suppose I've been one of them, you know, I suppose the perception would be that law is very glamorous and all of this lovely stuff, and you know, I'm saying to them, it's not quite the Ally McBeal or anything that people perceive it to be, but starting out, I would, you know, genuinely say, in terms of college and everything, enjoy your college experience, but if you are fortunate enough and start early to look for apprenticeships and try and build relationships with people, is that get as much broad experience as you can. For me personally, I was very lucky that, you know, I had a couple of excellent mentors when I started out, and I had a grounding, a very broad grounding from, you know, tax, business law, litigation, and it just naturally fell into employment law. But I don't think, just in my opinion, you can truly know what you want to do until you kind of try it all out. I don't know if you found that yourself, but sometimes people fall into areas, but I think if you can try and get as broad an experience as possible in whatever firm you're fortunate enough to get an opportunity in, then you will really discover what you want to do.
Wendy, thank you so much for your time. If anyone wanted to reach out to you,
talking to you. If
people wanted to reach out to you and contact you, what's the best way to get you?
So the website, David, is www.wdsolicitors.ie, and also we have our, you know, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter pages as well that we're very active on. Not as much as you, David, but trying to get there anyway. So it's we're trying to, and that's a compliment, by the way. I was saying to you before we started this, just, you know, great admiration as well, because it's running a business on top of the business of law at the end of the day. So onwards and upwards, I think, for all of us.
Thank you so much, and look, thank you so much again for your time, and we sincerely wish you all the best for the future.
It was lovely chatting to you, and I was going to say enjoy the weekend in as much as one can in the middle of COVID as well.
Within the 5K. Thank you, Wendy.
Yes. Thanks, David.